Chapter 110 of the Holiest of All by Andrew Murray. Chapter 110, Faith and its Power of Endurance. Hebrews chapter 11, verses 35 to 38. And others were tortured, not accepting their deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others had trial of mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, they were tempted, they were slain with the sword. They went about in sheepskins, in goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, evil entreated, whom the world was not worthy, wandering in deserts and mountains and caves, and the holes of the earth. Faith has a twofold victory. In one case, it conquers the enemy or the difficulty by securing its removal or destruction. In the other, there is no deliverance from the trouble, and yet faith conquers in the power it receives to endure, and to prove that its spirit is superior to all that men or devils can do. The triumphs of faith are often seen as remarkably in those who obtain no deliverance from the threatened evil as in those who do. After the mention of the heroes whose faith was rewarded with success, we have here the mention of those who, in the midst of suffering that was not removed, proved that their faith lifted them up above all the pains with which earth could threaten them. They were tortured, not accepting their deliverance when offered them at the price of their faithfulness, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Spiritual and eternal realities were by faith so clear and near that they reckoned not the sufferings of this present time worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed. The triumph of faith is seen as much in bearing a temporary defeat as securing a victory. The victory of the vanquished is often the highest achievement. In these men and women, leaders in the noble army of martyrs, rejected and despised by the world, God sees the heavenly beauty of a faith that honours him, and that counts his will, his favour, his righteousness, as more than all earthly happiness. By faith they had such a sight of God and his good pleasure, that they could with joy sacrifice everything to secure it. By faith they could, for the joy set before them, in the assurance of a heavenly recompense, count all the pleasures of earth as less than nothing. It is one of the highest and noblest exercises of faith to suffer aright. And the blessing that comes through suffering is one of the richest rewards that faith can win. God has given us these examples of those who by faith triumphed over the extremities of suffering, that we might from them learn how to bear our lesser trials. Their faith in extraordinary suffering must strengthen ours in ordinary. It is in the little common trials of daily life that every believer can follow in the footsteps of these saints, in the footsteps of the great leader of our salvation. By faith alone are we able to bear suffering, great or small, aright, to God's glory or our own welfare. Yes, by faith alone. Faith sees it in the light of God and eternity, its short pain, its everlasting gain, its impotence to hurt the soul, its power to purify and to bless it. It sees him who allows it, with us in the fire, as a refiner watching our purging and perfecting, as a helper of our strength and comfort. It sees that the forming of a character like that of the Son of God, maintaining at every cost the Father's will and honour, is more than all the world can give. It sees that to be made partaker of his holiness, to have the humility and weakness and gentleness of the Lamb of God inwrought into us, and, like him, to be made perfect in suffering, is the spirit of heaven, and it counts nothing too great to gain this treasure. By faith alone, but by faith most surely, we can, in the midst of the deepest suffering, be more than conquerors. We live in a world of suffering. What a privilege that suffering, instead of unfitting or excluding us, is God's special invitation to trust and glorify him. As we read of all that the men of faith had done, more than one has thought of his own unfavourable circumstances and his feeble strength. Never could his faith reach to the achievements of the men who are set before him as an example. What a privilege that there is no suffering so great and depressing, so little and harassing, but can be a school of faith, a heavenly instruction in the blessed art of making God all. of proving that for God's will and submission to it we are willing to bear all. Faith transfigures suffering, makes it transparent with the love of God, the presence of Jesus, the beauty of holiness, the blessing of heaven. As long as we live under the influence of the world and the flesh, all this appears but as a beautiful thought, without reality or possibility. Our epistle is speaking to those whom it has led into the holiest of all, who are walking in the new and living way of the will of God, of the obedience and the self-sacrifice and the death of Jesus. It is as we tarry in God's presence and seek, above everything, His holiness and His will, that we shall look at things as God does, and regard suffering in His light. Let this be our aim. Our passage gives new confirmation to the one lesson, by faith alone. Would you please God? Would you conquer sin and the world? Would you be holy and perfect? Would you live as the heir of heaven and eternity? Live as a man of faith. Meet every trial in the spirit of a joyful faith in God. Every trial will make thee more meet for and bring thee nearer to God's blessed presence. In the Old Testament, prosperity was promised, and yet faith could endure adversity. In the New, we are taught to expect adversity. The cross is the symbol of our faith. The man of sorrows is our leader. Much more ought we to be able to endure. Let every suffering one, every one who is bound to a sickbed or bowed down under some cross, learn to believe that in the affliction we can greatly glorify God by faith, and that by faith we can become teachers and helpers of others, fulfilling by example and intercession, in our measure, a very blessed part of the work of the body of Christ.